Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and we're here to preserve and promote culture in this benighted age, one weekly conversation at a time. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show through iTunes, or by plugging our RSS feed into your favorite podcatcher. You can find the RSS feed on our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. We're also on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on Spotify, YouTube, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And visit patreon.com/VMSpod or paypal.me/VMSpod to make a one-time or recurring contribution and help me continue to produce smart conversation about books, art, comics, and culture every week at the Virtual Memories Show. All right, that was more upbeat than I should have been. I'm kind of in a weird place this week. Well, first, as far as running goes, the hip problem I griped about last week turned out to be iliotibial band syndrome, IT band for short, which means 2 weeks of rehab exercises and naproxen and no running. I'm doing okay with that part of it. I've started doing weights and sit-ups and such to compensate for the lack of road work, so I'm incredibly sore in other areas. My doctor was worried that I'd chafe over the restrictions, but honestly, I'm pretty cognizant that taking up running at 47 meant I'd have to be careful. The upside is I should be able to start running again just in time for the first anniversary of when I accidentally started up this whole craziness. But that's not the weird place I'm in. The weird place is that I got up Friday morning and I thought, what if I just stopped making the podcast? And it seemed real to me in a way that it never really had. This notion of just not doing the show. It wasn't any sort of self-pitying thing about download numbers or, someday I'll hit it big, blah, blah, blah. And I think it's partly driven by the fact that I haven't recorded a new show in 4 weeks. But I was just hit by the possibility of just not making this anymore. And the problem was I wasn't able to figure out what the heck I'd be doing if I wasn't doing this. And I've talked about that before, that question of like what I would be reading if I wasn't reading books for upcoming guests. But this went broader than that, wondering not just what I'd do if I wasn't doing this, but who I'd even be. And later in the day, I looked over at my table, and there were a couple of essays I'd printed out that Howard Chaykin, the cartoonist, had sent me a while back. And I hadn't gotten around to reading them, so I did that earlier in the week and emailed him to let him know what I thought. But he had sent those to me to ask me what I thought. Like, my opinion actually mattered to him. This guy whose work I started reading like 35 years ago. And I thought about him and all those people I've gotten to meet and talk to through this, not just the guests, but people who write to me after listening to one about, somebody they like, and all those great conversations and the friendships that have flowered and all that stuff that the show has brought me and what it's brought other people. And I don't know. It's not like I had some grand epiphany or anything. I just couldn't quite figure out who I am if I wasn't this guy. And I know we all don't quite know what our self-definition is, but here I am. Who I am, no idea. But I told my pal, Tom Spurgeon, who comes up in this week's conversation a few times during this whole weekend of self-negation, and we talked or corresponded a bunch about this and legacy and finding some meaning in what you do. I wrote him and I said, I'm sure the next time I sit down to record with someone, I will feel like I am exactly where I'm supposed to be. And that's probably all this is. But yeah, it was just kind of a weird moment, a weird place. just to allay your fears, I have a session scheduled for this weekend with the TV critic Emily Nussbaum. I am planning on taking next week off because I want to do 50 shows even for the year, and that's sort of at some point this summer, that's when that has to happen. So it's going to be next week. So if you don't find an episode in your queue next week, don't freak out. I didn't decide to quit. I may have gotten blown up by fireworks because it's July 4th weekend, and that could be a thing too. But the upside is I will keep making this show. And I have a whole bunch of great guests lined up for this fall and later this summer. And just today, the great Milton Glaser wrote back to me from my pitch earlier in the weekend with, call my studio and set up a time. So that might be coming in the next couple of weeks too. The other thing is I didn't want Karl Stevens to be the final guest on the show. That's why I have to keep doing it. Our guest this week is Karl Stevens. I was going to say the cartoonist Karl Stevens, but a chunk of our conversation this week is about the intersection of comics and art, and I could just as easily have said the artist Karl Stevens, and that might have sounded more pretentious or dramatic or something, but the upside is Karl is an artist who makes comics. His strips in particular have this fine line realist style, and his color work is in this really delicate watercolor. You know, as opposed to like exaggerated Bigfoot style comics, his work has a real fine art air to it, not in any sort of pretentious way, but the photorealism of what you look at when you look at his comics is very different than what you get from, I don't know, we'll say Jim Woodring, for example, with his thicker line, surreal Bigfoot comics. The other thing is, Karl is just a few years younger than me. It's enough for it to be a generational difference in terms of some of the comics that we glommed onto. Like I was just a little too old for the Todd McFarlane superhero thing, but that was right in his age group and wheelhouse. But we did come up on a similar vibe of superhero comics, and I was really interested in learning about his evolution, both as a cartoonist and a comics reader. Like how you get from those exaggerated, overdrawn superheroes of the late 80s into the 90s and become what he became, this guy doing hyper-realistic looking comics that are also, well, very realist in terms of the subject matter about his formerly dissolute life, his cat, his wife, the self-deprecating domesticity that runs through it all. How do you get to that from, wanting to be a Spider-Man cartoonist? And he captures a lot of those elements I just mentioned in his recent collection from Retrofit Comics, which you should definitely check out. It's called The Winner. And actually, since that's come out, he's also carved a pretty neat niche for himself as a New Yorker gag cartoonist. On top of that, he got to draw a series of large comics to accompany a Botticelli exhibition at the Gardner Museum in Boston. And when you get down to it, the tension between high art and cartooning that's kind of brought out through that work is right up Karl's alley. He also works as a museum guard, which is something we get into. Anyway, we're going to talk with Karl Stevens. He's a good cartoonist. He's a younger cartoonist. And as you know, I hate people who are younger than me and actually have accomplished something. But I was really glad to get to sit down with him. Now, as far as caveats go, not a ton. We recorded in my hotel room during TCAF, the Toronto Comic Arts Festival in May. So the mic placement is just a little weird because of the height of the table we had and the depth of the chairs. But it's the same setup we had for the recent ones with Seth and Nina Bunchevac and Bill Griffith. Also, for those of you not in the know, people who are not comics people per se, when we discuss a guy named Dave Sim, we're talking about a cartoonist who famously did a 300-issue monthly comic book called Cerebus from the 70s to the early aughts. And while the comics themselves, the Cerebus comics, were absolutely amazing to look at in terms of art, design, and lettering and everything else, and the story Sim was, I think, trying to tell over the course of it, he himself kind of went off the rails in the early 90s and began publishing his misogynistic theories of male-female relations inside the comic. And these these reach the level of like cosmology where like the entire universe is geared around male and female energy, and well, male and female forces, and I guess the way the female sucks the life force out of the male. And anyway, Sim was a prickly, sort of problematic figure in the comics world already. Less for that ideology, more for his take on self-publishing and some of the fights he got in with stores and distributors. But that those essays started to really drive him out of the village. So that's a little bit of foregrounding for a conversation you're going to hear, or parts of the conversation you're going to hear shortly. Anyway, here's Karl's bio. Karl Stevens is a graphic novelist and painter. His first book, Guilty, was published in 2004 with a grant from the Zarek Foundation. He is also the author of Whatever in 2008, The Lodger, a Los Angeles Times Book Prize finalist in 2010, and Failure in 2013, as well as The Winner in 2018. His comic strips appeared in the Boston Phoenix between 2005 and 2012 until an incident with an advertiser resulted in the strip's cancellation. The realist comic artist has also co-produced the Phoenix comic Success with Gustavo Turner. In 2016, the Village Voice began running his cat comic strip, Penny. Stevens's work also appears in select art galleries, and he has published numerous cartoons in The New Yorker. He recently produced a 12-panel comic to celebrate the Gardner Museum's Botticelli, Heroines and Heroes exhibition. And now, the Virtual Memories conversation with Karl Stevens.
Actually, that's been the theme of TCAF. Like,
yeah.
Alex and I have been talking about that a lot.
How so?
Well, just about how cartoonists in general are so socially awkward.
Well,
but it's a particular kind of social awkwardness.
How do you characterize it?
Well, that
we're recording right now, so if you say anything embarrassing, I'll cut this part out. But you know, if this is cool to keep in, we'll do that. So
yeah, that's fine. It's just like,
how inept are you guys? Is what I'm.
Well, I mean, I've been fighting my whole life not to be that way,
mm-hmm.
but I'm sure that I am. I mean, it's because we like went to that thing at the Masonic Temple the first night, and it just felt like a high school dance, or like a junior high dance, where everyone was sort of in their little cliques and not talking to anyone else or mingling, and it just. But I guess I was the same way. Like, I wasn't going up to anyone and trying to talk, but like but even just interacting people like on the floor, it's very strange. Like, unless you really know the person,
mm-hmm.
you know, it's like hard to get people out of their shells.
Yeah,
you know?
For me, I've always had Tom Spurgeon as my buffer. I've known Tom a million years, and he's friendly enough with everybody that we can just get introduced, or they cut me slack as a non-artist. Because I'm with Tom, it's okay.
Right.
And once I started doing the show, and the more of these guys I got to know, social interactions became easier with some of these guys. They understood that, I wasn't going to be fawning or giving them my portfolio to look at to advance things. So
right. Yeah. That's true. I guess that's it. They're like a little guarded, because like there is like a level of crazy.
Yeah.
When it comes to the fans, man. But actually, like, Tom's interesting. Like, how did you become friends with Tom?
Well, that's a funny one. To me, probably not to you. Back in the 90s, the Comics Journal had some of the worst copy editing of all time. They had typos all over the place. And I would occasionally write in, little corrections I'd send by email. This is, early-ish days of email, like mid-90s. Mm-hmm. But then I had back-to-back critiques of Comics Journal articles. One was about something about if DC had treated Alan Moore better, he would have been sticking with them and could have done big numbers and all these things at DC, and it would have been, this it's alternate history that made no sense whatsoever.
That would have been interesting.
Yeah, it just wouldn't have held up to reality. And I made a comment about, something about Tom Stoppard doing Arcadia for like a major movie studio instead of, writing a play.
Sure.
And then related to something else, I made a joke about the late 70s X-Men and Moses Malone from the Philadelphia 76ers. And that was having those three things in back-to-back emails pretty much secured my standing with Tom. And so next time he came to New York, we met up. We saw Kevin Kline in Kevin Kline's terrible performance of Ivanov on Broadway, and that was, from there on, we were great pals. It's been about 25 years.
That's a great story.
But Moses Malone and his mandroids. It was just this weird X-Men joke from that era. So,
well, that makes sense as far as Spurgeon goes, because he is like a fan of sports, like college basketball, so like he has these like interests that are like outside of.
And it's very few cartoonists who have that. Porcelino was one who I could, I asked a football question to, and it was the king of mini comics explaining how he can cheer for both the Bears and the Broncos. This was like a big thing that he was able to justify being a sports bigamist.
Yeah, that's great.
But yeah, generally, relating to guys just on the basis of the comics can be a little. You don't want to seem too I'm your biggest fan sort of guy.
Right.
But
that's also the other thing too. It's a strange like hierarchy. And I've been doing this like off and on. Well, okay, like I started going to conventions when I was 15, and 40 now. So it's been
too long. You can just say too
25 years. What time is it? So so it's just strange to like just sort of witness that like for my whole entire adult life, just like that. Well, because that started like in the early 90s, I guess, and like the industry was a lot different back then. So I guess like I got to see like the tail end of all the speculator stuff, and like that's what I got into. I mean, I was 13 or 14, and I loved all those Image comics and everything, and that was what really drew me to the medium. Because I'm going to start going off in a million directions.
Oh no, it's okay. That's you've listened to the show enough. You know that it's all about these weird divagations and.
But yeah, I mean, I guess, that's how I decided that I wanted to dedicate my life to it, which is like very strange, to like think about it, to like think back to that now, that, like I like had this friend when I was in middle school who showed me all these Todd McFarlane comics, and there was something about them that really, I was just really drawn to. And I think it wasn't like the monsters or like the blood or, it was like Spawn or like those Spider-Man comics, but it was just like the detail that he like put into the panels. And it just like something like went off in my brain saying that, wow, like I want to be able to like draw something like that. But I guess that's pretty typical of like a lot of kids. Like they just want to draw very like realistically or something, or like that's what makes like a great drawing. But that was really at the gateway, and then like that Cerebus issue of Spawn, like,
kind of introduced you to
to like the more artistic comic books, I guess, because then I asked my local retailer if they had this Cerebus thing, and they did, and I just started buying it, and I was right in the middle of I forget which story it was.
The misogyny one? I'm just kidding.
I mean, it was like not long before that.
Yeah.
And, I was definitely too young to really process it. But I remember that he would, like Dave Sim would run backup stories by other artists in there. And that just it just kept opening up doors to like the underground. And, then I discovered all the Fantagraphics artists, and it just started it just had this like snowball effect. But I don't know. I mean, I guess I was like hungry for like some sort of like art. I mean, I grew up like in the woods of Massachusetts, and like my parents didn't take us to museums. Like I didn't go to a museum until I was 18. Like I moved to Boston, and but it was there. I mean, I had art like in high school and like growing up, but there wasn't like a lot of art history and anything. And I don't know, I guess I just wanted to be an artist, but like I didn't know how. And like just like the comics were just so accessible that I just sort of latched onto that. And it just became this obsession until then.
And yet you pursued a visual style that puts you at odds with a lot of cartoonists, with that sort of naturalist and the watercolor work that you do.
Yeah, I mean, well, that was definitely.
I mean, it's later in your development, but
it is. Yeah, well, but not that much later. I mean, like when I went to art school. I mean, I was a terrible high school student, and so like my options for college were pretty limited. But you know, I was a pretty talented artist, so like my portfolio got me into the small private school like outside of Boston called Montserrat College of Art. So. I went there, and then, you know, I mean, all my teachers were, of course, like in like the fine art world, so they started, you know,
pushing you away from comics.
Yeah, just pushing me away from comics. It was that typical thing, but you know, comics weren't as, you know, you like hear stories of people like in the 80s, like cartoonists, you know, who like were in the 70s, like Dan Clowes, I guess, is someone famous for that, always saying that all his teachers and like when he was in school just. That comics were like beneath contempt, but it wasn't that bad. But it definitely was sort of not looked upon as, you know, fine art. But just like discovering like Rembrandt and like old master drawings, like I started to make this connection when I was 18 or 19 that like these are just drawings by guys. You know, it's not just this, you know, elitist sort of thing that is like separate from what cartoonists are doing, because like they're, you know, like Rembrandt was drawing with ink, you know, in the way that say like Jules Pfeiffer is drawing in ink, you know, it's like the same, like they're still making these like ink lines to like delineate these forms, and also to like tell stories too, because like a lot of those commissions were like storytelling, you know, I mean, you know, they're like
single panel, but narrative painting.
Yeah, but like narrative painting, right? Like that's what I'm trying to articulate.
It's only because I went to this Moroni exhibition at the Frick a couple of weeks ago with another past guest of the show that was very, again, you know, single canvas, but there were these narrative emblems throughout the thing that you sort of needed to be decoded just because the narrative doesn't make sense 400 years later. But.
Right, yeah, exactly. I mean, that leads up to the show that I did at the Gardner, but I mean...
Which we'll get to. I do have the Botticelli project here, so that's
Yeah, I mean, so it's interesting how it's come full circle. But yeah, so I mean, so I just made that like connection that like they're drawing in the same way that these cartoonists that I love are drawing. So wouldn't it be interesting if you could make a comic that took the techniques of all these dead painters that I've been studying and use them to make my comics, and like how would that look? Mm-hmm. So that was my big conceptual art idea. But also it was just more interesting to me to draw that way. I mean, I would try to draw more cartoony or expressive things, and I would just get bored, actually. Like,
you just mentioned the Carl Stevens Bigfoot style.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I do it in my sketchbook, you know, a lot. I mean, you know, I'll get stoned and like draw cartoony stuff like R. Crumb did, you know. But you know, it just also seemed like it like hadn't been done, because like the stories that like I wanted to tell were more, you know, the like quiet everyday. You know, just like I wanted to make just fiction that was about my friends, you know, and you know, I was reading like, well, you know, Optic Nerve like everyone. So I mean, or I guess like Ghost World, you know, like.
Yeah,
like those type, or like like Love and Rockets, you know,
alt
like
canon from the
exactly,
late 80s and 90s,
the alt canon. But you know, but they all did it in this very stylized, cartoony style, you know, a very conservative style for comics. And you know, I thought, well, like this would be interesting, because it's kind of funny. Like on one hand, that this like realistic drawing style in the fine art world is considered very conservative, but like in comics, it would be considered almost radical, because like there aren't, I mean, there like hasn't really been anyone who, you know, did those type of comics in like this realistic style. And it just sort of made sense to me, because, you know, it's like these naturalistic stories about everyday life, but you know, like why not do them in this naturalistic story? And if you're pacing them so slow, you like won't run into all those problems that you know Scott McCloud talked about in Understanding Comics, which is, you know, I think the reason he poo-pooed that type of realism is because he just doesn't have the chops to draw that way.
Which is fine. That's a yesterday's guest, Bill Griffith, had a couple of backhanded slaps at McCloud over the years in his comic where everybody's drawn in McCloudian style, and he sort of undercuts everything about it. So, yeah, don't...
Well, no, I mean, it's his... I mean, okay, not... His contribution with that book to the medium and how it's... And so, like, what it has become is, like...
Well, it's still even if you disagree with it, you have to engage with it. You know, even if you disagree, even in the act of disagreeing, you can articulate your own views on this in a way that you may not have done prior to at least having that as a antithesis to work against.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that is what they teach you in art school too. You know, like you need to just read the things that you hate in order to like become, you know, like a better artist. But I mean, I didn't at the time. I mean, I like read that when I was, you know, like 14 or 15. Cause,
that would have been about the age, the year it came out, like 92, 93.
Yeah, it's like 93. And like, I mean, I still have like the kitchen sink version of that, you know? Yeah. So it's, so I mean, maybe that's what you could distill what I've done, like all the way down to that. It's like, I want to prove Scott McCloud wrong. Could be it.
Do you feel there's I would say distancing effect, but the photorealist style, does it take readers, you know, time to catch on to it? You know, do you see readers saying, I like the stories, but I just, you know, either the visual doesn't make sense or they get drawn into the sheer detail of
I think it's more the latter.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, like I've never had anyone say that like the art has gotten in the way of the story. I don't know. I mean, like, what do you think? I'm too close to it.
It's just because it looks so different. It's one of those, not that different in a bad way, but just that it's not cartoony. And the photorealist thing always raises the question of, is he doing all this from photo reference? And how boring must his life be if he's taking pictures of people every goddamn minute to to do this stuff?
But it's not boring. Yeah. And yes and no. Yeah. I mean, I don't know, I just find it endlessly fascinating. You know, I mean, you know, it's just part of, I think just being a visual artist is just being aware of like your surroundings and like seeing things, you know? So, and actually that's also the power of the comics too, is that, you know, it's not just like reliance on like the words or the pictures. And like, there is something to be said in like, you know, the way that like light hits objects, you know, like that is part of the story too. So, you know, I mean, like when you read a prose novel, you know, there are like paragraphs that go on and on about, I mean, I don't know.
Just
like,
visual description of things.
It's a good example of that. I mean, well, like Flaubert, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I've just read Sentimental Education. And,
oh, yeah?
You know, like that's one of the most like visual books I think I've like ever read. It's just, you know, these beautiful descriptions of like, you know, like the backgrounds and like, you know, rooms. And it's just, you know, it's incredible. And I mean, if I could achieve like half of that in like comics, you know, I would just die happy. But of course I would never know because I hate everything I do. So.
Yeah. Have you ever been happy with work? After?
Yeah. I mean, you know, like maybe like years later, but I like rarely look back. I mean, like some of like the like earlier stuff looks a little too dense with the cross hatching. I mean, I have like a lot of regrets. Like when I first started doing the Boston Phoenix weekly strip, that I just spent too long on it, you know.
Was that a learning process, though? Figuring out what you didn't need to do?
Yeah, it was. I mean, well, like that whole period, like I was lucky enough to get a Xeric grant to do my first book. It was called Guilty. And but like that book was very heavily crosshatch. I mean, it was in this very like just dense, almost like an etching sort of style. And I was spending like 30 to 40 hours on each page. And it was, you know, I saw it. I mean, I was 25, and I saw it as my big like testament, like you know, against like the whole like minimal, like simple comics. Like I'm gonna make something that's the exact opposite, and it's gonna blow everyone's mind.
Well, you're half right. But in a sense, is that an extension of the? Thank you. That is a good one. But an extension of the McFarlane image influence, just the sheer perfluence of lines, even though you weren't employing it for action comics by any means.
Yeah,
you know.
I think so. I mean, I mean, like, definitely, it like must come from that, you know, because like that was like my first love, and like it must have just informed me to like that level. But that's, you know,
I just find it ironic that the sweatshirt that you have on, the hoodie, is actually this intensely tight grid of cross-hatching little lines also. I'm just envisioning it as a panel of yours.
yeah.
But first, did you discover issues with reproducing comics that had that much hatching, that detail you were putting in simply wasn't showing up on the printed page? And what point did you start to realize, again, you didn't need all the lines? You know, you could pull back and you know, get what you wanted to get across.
I mean, it's like fairly recent. I mean, it wasn't until like I really just sort of started looking at comics more. I mean, you know, I've always looked at comics, and especially like my peers, you know, like Lauren Weinstein or Gabriel Bell. I mean, you know, I like really love their work, and they definitely do not draw like me. Or I'm like Joe Deasy is another one. He's a British comics artist. But I guess like for my own style, I mean, I started loosening up more when I started looking at, well, you know, like the great realist comics, I guess, of like the newspaper strips, which is like fairly recently, like Alex Raymond or Al Williamson, Leonard Starr. I mean, I just, I mean, they were always kind of there, but they just, I always associate, I mean, I'm such a snob. I mean, I always associated them with like illustration, and, you know, like I always saw like comics as not illustration.
Yeah.
And
you got caught up in the
don't.
same, your own work got caught up in the same divide, you know?
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, you know, but I mean that, like, I really don't think cartoonists who, like, write their own work are illustrators. I mean, I feel that's such like a 20th century like notion, you know, like if you make something representational, you're an illustrator, you know. And I think like from just studying like old master art too, like that, I mean, like, because that is considered like the epitome, or it was, I mean, I guess it still is, of the like Western canon of like, you know, art. I mean, it's fine art with a capital F-A, but they're making like narrative images, you know. So I mean, like, how could you, and like realistic images, or, you know, naturalistic, sometimes, but like, how could that be considered fine art? But then if you're making figurative art, that comes from yourself, you know, it's like not that you're not doing advertising, like or like collaborating. It's just like something that comes from you, but it just happens to be figurative. Like how is that considered illustration? You know, I mean, like, I think of illustration as just something that's commercial, or you're doing something for somebody, but you're just doing it for the money. Yeah, which I guess is commercial.
Yeah, I mean, Jaime talked about that. I think when we had our conversation, Jaime Hernandez mentioned, you know, the spot illustrations for the New Yorker, they pay well, but they're simply not going to be as inspired as a single panel of Love and Rockets.
Yeah,
you know.
But that's why Love and Rockets is fine art.
Yeah,
you know, it's not illustration.
I'm totally down. Yeah.
It's just that like notion just really, it just irks me. I mean, because it's such like a weird like 20th century distinction. Like, it comes from like Clement Greenberg or something, you know. From
I think this is ways of segmenting or creating a hierarchy so that someone can feel more special than you know, those guys beneath them. So.
Right. But like, I wonder if that's like pervasive like into comics. It's like we just sort of think that we're just doing. It's like we still think we're making this like junk art, but like it's not. You know, it's fine art. You know, I mean, it's the most exciting like art that's being produced today.
Well, it's weird because like Ben Catcher, it's a story I've told a million times on the show, but it was explained to me by one of Ben's pals. Ben doesn't think his original art is worth anything, or that anybody would want to see it.
That's insane.
Yeah, but this person who's a friend of his said, well, Ben has worked with printers for years, and to him, those drawings are just instructions for a printer.
Yeah.
And that's how he sees things. The printed result is the Ben Catcher strip, not this, you know, drawn page or, you know, computer file now.
Right. But it's like the printed results in whatever year that was printed.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, like printing techniques have
Oh, I know, and it seems so strange to me when this guy described it. But
you know, but like the art like will always exist as it exists.
Yeah, I mean, he just wasn't getting it. He just nobody's interested in my originals. He said, we're like, and it was a live session, just like 100 people. Like, no, we'd really want to see what your originals look like, Ben. Just didn't agree.
I mean, even like on a financial point.
Well, yeah, that came up later when I have an anecdote about that. I'll tell you off mic, but you know, do you feel like you've sort of reconciled the painting and cartooning schism, or is it just one of those you've given up and fuck it, this is the comics that I make, this is the art that I make, this is how it works?
No, I mean, like there's still that tension, and Alex always makes fun of me for this.
For a number of reasons, but for that too.
Yeah, this is like the one. Like, because there's always a point in the night, if like I'm hanging out with cartoonist friends, or even friends that I've just known a long time, that, you know, if like
you have to crusade.
I just go for my favorite topic, you know. What should I do with my career, you know? I mean, I said it to like Spurgeon the other night, you know. I was like asking him. Well, no, because it was like after that thing at the Masonic Temple. It's like, you know, fuck all these like comics people, you know. They're just like, you know, they're just awkward, and like it's just like this whole scene is just terrible. Like I should just go make paintings, you know. But like I don't mean it.
Yeah,
but it's just,
and the art world itself is also a nightmare.
But that is the same thing on that, you know.
So. That's one of those things. It's the wow, you know, the stakes are higher, but in fact the gatekeeping is even crazier. Although you have a gallery, right? You're
yeah. Well, I mean that's a long story. I'm actually between galleries. I have like a meeting next week with this new gallery, like my old gallery. Like we had some problems, and I had to cut ties with him.
Yeah, which, again, you know, it's the, I should get out of comics and find new frustrations in this other art world. And,
yeah, well, that's just it. But I mean, I know like your question isn't about that, but
that's part of it, though. There's both the market, the community aspect, and how art is perceived, you know, from one form to another.
Yeah, that's true. Well, like in the fine art world, I mean, comics are definitely still illustration, you know, at best. I mean, I mean, I was lucky that my gallery in Boston really did get it. You know, I mean, like he really did see my work, or just comics in general, as art, you know, and he priced them as such and was able to sell them. But I mean, it's just, you know, he had to like display them in a way, like when we did the show for the art in the Lodger, you know, that was like a year in the life story. So, and it was 96 pages. So we took each month. So like 8 pages would be like each month. And we like arranged them on the wall in just like an interesting way. So, and just sold them as like a set. So like you could buy January or February. So he felt that he had to like tart the work up like in that way to like have it appeal to his clients who like bought fine art. So, I mean, which is fine, but it's still that like disconnect. Yeah, I guess like exists. Like, you know, this, you know, he like can't just say, oh, I have this cartoonist who draws really well, and you know, look at these drawings. But then like, but you know, he has to like make it seem like it's something that's not what it is. Recontextualizes
it in a frame that makes it art.
Exactly.
As opposed to, no, this isn't comics. It's okay.
Yeah. But it's, I mean, so there's that. So like, there's that. It's like two uphill battles, you know. So it's like which, but I see it as like a hill, you know. I'm just kind of like running around this hill,
circling it and putting under siege. Yeah, one man siege. That's good.
But I don't know what's at the top.
Well, you've added a third front though, because you're now gag paneling. You know, you're pitching to the New Yorker.
Yeah.
So, how did that start for you, and what have you learned about cartooning from that form as opposed to the work you were doing previously?
Well, it started. They approached me, which is the only way, I think.
Seth was saying the same thing about playwriting yesterday. He'd love to write a play. If a theater would come to him and commission it and do everything, he would never, you know, write something on his own and pitch it around. But
well, there's a point where like spec work. I don't know. I mean, like I have an agent now who's amazing, Meg Thompson. Like she handles all the publishing and I'll tell you. I mean, I just like having been like rejected so many times, it's just so much easier to just have someone deal with that for you. But I was lucky, like with the New Yorker, that Emma Allen, who's the cartoon editor over there, she just happened to be in this bookstore in Greenpoint, and they had a copy of The Winner, and she was just flipping through it and thought that I would be a good New Yorker cartoonist, which is astounding to me, and I guess speaks to, how well she understands like comics. Because I mean, I that's something I'd like never considered ever.
Had the New Yorker been any sort of symbol in your life previously?
Oh yeah, I mean, I've been reading it since I was 18.
Mm-hmm.
So and it's the New Yorker. I mean,
just to know if it had that sort of significance, or if it was I know this is supposed to be significant, but
no, not at all.
You're actually
no. I mean, I read it, mostly cover to cover until until it wanes, and I just read Shouts and Murmurs and the cartoons and maybe the fiction. Actually, I've been reading like a lot of the fiction. Yeah. So that's sort of my favorite part. So I mean, she just emailed. Actually, she emailed my gallery. And asked if I would be interested. And then my gallery was like, "Are you interested for working for the New Yorker?"
No, not me.
Yeah. So then, so I just got in touch with her and went down, we met and had coffee. And, she just told me what's expected. And she was really, really great. Like when I first started submitting, she would give me like feedback and help me like right up until I, sold the first one. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it hasn't even been a year yet, but I've sold 14, which is something. Sweet. So
how different is it than your regular cartooning?
It's a lot different. Yeah. Well, I mean, I have a friend that helps me with the writing. Mm-hmm. His name's Gustavo Turner. Yeah. And, he's a really talented writer and comedian, I guess, cartoonist. I've known him for years, and like when I was working at Harvard, I was working at the Harvard Art Museums, and actually when that Guilty came out, he was teaching. He has his PhD from Harvard. So I mean, I think every humorist needs to have a Harvard guy in his back pocket.
Yeah, because otherwise, there's no end. Yeah, and if anybody studied humor to death, it would be Harvard people.
Yeah, I mean,
Or is that line from The Simpsons? I did my senior thesis at Harvard on life experience. That was
exactly, and that was written by a fucking Harvard student.
Yeah,
but Gustavo was teaching this class, and it was a graphic novel class, and like that's how we met. So like one of his students like got a copy of Guilty from the local comics shop in Cambridge, and so we met and we became like really close friends. Mm-hmm. And we like collaborated on a series of strips for the Phoenix too in 2008. It was called Success. That it has yet to be collected, and it's about like all these finance bros, I guess.
Yeah.
But like they take all these crazy drugs. Actually, you'd be really interested in this.
Yeah. I saw a description of it in one of your other books. So yeah, I figure I have to check it out whenever it gets collected.
Yeah, I'll send it to you.
Cool.
So like we had like a lot of fun with that. Like we did it for almost a year, and then we did just like one-off stuff for the Phoenix. I mean, like the Phoenix was like really good to me at the time. Mm-hmm. So they would just let me do like crazy like 2-page spreads, like in addition to having the weekly comic. So it was fun to work with Gustavo. I mean, I like generally don't like to collaborate at all. It just feels too much like work. But he's someone that I can, because he's just a friend, but he's also a good writer. But he like definitely has that thing that, and I'm sure he's going to be listening to this, where
I wouldn't be so sure. I'm just kidding.
I mean, he will. He will. That he like a lot of writers. I mean, like Gustavo draws too, and he's actually a really talented photographer. He's out in LA now and does stuff for like LA Weekly, and now he works for XBiz. He's in the porn industry, but that's another story. But so he's like really visual, but like he does this thing that like some writers do where he'll just he'll say, okay, panel 1, it's 20 characters, 2 are clowns, 3 are spacemen, 4 are wearing suits, there's a small child, a couple dogs, this is panel 1. So, he'll just like describe everything or like pack it in. So you have to like,
do what you can visually.
Do what you can, or just But he's definitely, I can talk to him about stuff. So for like the New Yorker, like if I'm stuck on something, I'll just like shoot him like an image and be like, what's like a funnier line for this? Or he'll just write something for me, But like the problem with him is that like he wants credit for everything, and I just want him to be a ghost in the background and just like disappear, but he won't. So I have to appease his ego.
Yeah. So we'll have to delete this part of the show. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I mean, if you would, I want to
never know about the importance of them.
But that's like my biggest fear is that people are just going to think that, like Gustavo's
the brains behind the operation. Yeah. Well, that was Neil Brennan, the guy who was Dave Chappelle's partner on the Chappelle Show.
Oh yeah.
Apparently, other comedians referred to him as Dave Chappelle's typist, which he did not take well, and he's had an amazing career of his own. His 3 Mic special on Netflix is just fantastic.
Really?
But that degree of the other guy sort of overshadowing you get rankle, I guess. But in terms of just that style of humor, was there anything well, it's not exactly the sort of joke I would tell, but it's a New Yorker thing, so did you have to change at all your approach to either the humor or the art?
Yes and no. I mean, well, it's just a completely different animal. I mean, because like the jokes that I've been writing for like the weekly strips, it's like generally like a 6-panel setup. So like that has like a certain rhythm.
Yeah.
And I mean, that was like hard to do at first. I mean, like when I first started doing that for the Phoenix, it was like right after Guilty. And when I was doing Guilty, I'm just going to ramble. Like I was all about just doing this, like I'm going to make important graphic novels. Like, I'm going to do these like long stories, these like fiction, I'm going to make like the great American fictional graphic novel, and that's going to be my career. But then like the Phoenix, I was doing illustration work for them on the side, and then they redesigned the paper, and they're like, we really like this novella that you did. Would you want to do like a weekly strip? And, like we'll pay you, it was like $150 a week, which was, to me at the time, that's money to do comics.
Right.
And so I was like, yes, but like, I had no experience doing like one pagers because like my brain was thinking I'm going to do these longer stories. So I had to really train myself to learn how to do that. And it just became, it wasn't until like a couple years into it that like I really felt I had a handle on it, And then now that's really the only way I think. Like I can't go back. It's like ruined me. I mean, I've been trying to like draw or write these longer stories, but like I keep getting stuck. And I think it's that I just think in like 6-panel gags now. So
if you can make a career out of it, that works. In fact, tell me about the Botticelli project we were talking about with the Gardner Museum. How that came about and how it was different than, stuff you may have done previously. Well,
that was out of left field. Well, so Nat Silver is the curator over there, and I guess I'll admit it. So, like, I've been working there as a guard. And
this is in your comics.
Yeah,
you work comics. As a guard in an art museum.
Yeah.
You don't carry a gun, though.
I don't, thank God.
Paintball gun, which would make more sense for the art thing. But anyway, go on.
Yeah. I mean, that would be great. I mean, like museum guards are all insane. I mean, I've worked at 3 different museums, and it's definitely like a type. But anyways, like I'd been working at the Gardner for about 5 years, and I'm at the staff entrance and also in the control room. So it's this very, it's like a job for like college kids, because like you just get to sit and like just, it's just all downtime. You just have to glance at the cameras occasionally. So, so I'm basically just using it as my studio. And so, I just got to know everyone there. And so I got to know Nat, who's like the main like curator at the museum, and they were planning this Botticelli show. So like the Botticelli painting in the collection is this narrative painting about the story of Lucretia, which is this ancient Roman story about suicide, rape, and murder. And
not in that order.
Not in that order.
Yeah.
And So the idea for the show was that like that was going to be like the center, but Botticelli had done these other narrative paintings called Spaliero, which are these long rectangular paintings that typically like depict stories of like antiquity or like religious, like some sort of story. So they were getting two that I guess he had done around, well, he did do them around the same time and just like reuniting them in the gallery. Mm-hmm. But because they were these narrative paintings, they thought it would be interesting to get a contemporary narrative artist, a cartoonist, to
of all things,
to reinterpret these, because they're these very complex stories that are just hard for like the modern viewer to understand, or I mean,
or just decode, like I was saying about the other the Moroni stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Like you don't have that context anymore. Mm-hmm. So they commissioned me to do that for the Botticellis, and that was, I mean, I'd like heard about it. Like people were like whispering in my ear that like they were planning the show, and so I kind of lobbied for it. But I mean, like Nat had like known my work anyways, and so he asked me if I would do it, and it's a museum show. So, but that was like a true like collaboration. Like I really worked with him and like other people in the museum on it. Like they just didn't give me the blank wall. So
sort of a bonus art history lesson for you.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, like for sure. I mean, for like the stories. I mean, I was unfamiliar with the Lucretia story. I mean, I was more familiar with like the different depictions like throughout art history. Like there's this great like Rembrandt version of the story that's at the National Gallery. That's it's just a single figure of Lucretia like about to stab herself, and she's holding on to this curtain rope, like about to like close it on her. It's just this beautiful like late Rembrandt. Mm-hmm. But yeah, like I like never read like the text, the like Livy text or any of that. So it was interesting to do that and like to try to draw something like in that style too, with a lot of helmets and Roman like outfits.
Had you done much commission work before?
Oh yeah, but it's just like junky stuff, like here and there, for
like Spider-Man riding an aardvark wearing a cowboy hat or something.
Yeah. That's just like private commissions. I've done stuff for magazines. Actually, I was if I'm gonna call it The Believer, I did something like for them. Like I just like came across the issue actually. But like the one and only time I did work for them was for this center spread article, and it was like, it was like 100 heads. It was all these like philosophers. It was like Socrates to like all the way up to Sartre. It was just these like headstones. It's like I drew like portraits that were like put on the headstones, and it was 100 of them, and I got paid $100 for it.
But think of the exposure.
Think of the artist size of exposure. And so, but it like took them a year to like pay me. So I was like, I mean, I like feel bad for like the editor now in like retrospect, but like I would not let it go. I mean, it was like for like the principle.
No, again, it becomes more costly for you to harass them about it, but it's still just the principle. You have to get that goddamn money
you
out
have
of them.
To pay artists, man. Yeah. I mean, I've like noticed like that's. Like Lisa Hennewald is making like a big deal of that now. Like if you follow her Instagram, and I think it's great. Like she's just calling out people that have like screwed her over, and just exposing that, because like that is just. I mean, there is a certain place in hell for like people who fuck over artists. It's just they have no idea like just like the amount of time it takes and just like what artists like put into this work. It's really unconscionable.
Yeah, I was embarrassed that one of my favorite artists was doing commissions. I asked him to do one for me, and it was, I don't know, like $35 or $40. But if you don't like it, Gil, I can send over another one. I'm like, you're already undercharging for everything you've done. This is gorgeous. God. Don't worry. This is great. Also, you should charge more for Christ's sake. So,
oh, yeah. Yeah. That's another problem with cartoonists that drives me bananas.
The lack of understanding of their own market value.
I mean, like we were talking about that with like Peter Bagg. Okay, maybe Peter's listening to this, but I mean, come on, dude. I mean, like,
charge more.
It's like you have no idea who you are. I mean, like he like I like posted it on Twitter. I was like, bought these. Like I bought a little piece of comics history, and then Peter like replied, "Oh, comics history, haha! I should have charged you more." I'm like, damn right. Yeah. But no, like no backsies.
Yeah, there is a degree that some of these guys. Well, I mean, it's the origin of my communication and friendship with Tom Tomorrow, Dan Perkins. Like he was doing a Kickstarter for this 25-year edition of This Modern World, slipcase 2-volume thing, and he said he spent a year paring down the production costs as far as possible because he was convinced he was barely gonna, if at all, scrape towards this number because all he knew was newspapers were dropping him and he had no audience or value. So he gets it down to about $87,000 for this run. He ends up pulling about $300,000 plus on Kickstarter from it and realizes, that the whole newspaper thing is not a barometer of my audience. Okay, because that was the only surrogate he had was every paper telling him you're not worth anything. And the moment it was, will you give me money for something? People were, oh my God, yes, we love your work. So yeah, even someone who's been in the field for decades, you don't know. There's more of a disconnect, I think, between the traditional ways of understanding an audience versus the, disintermediation of the internet where we actually directly, talk to people.
Yeah, it's very much more, it's just immediate, but that's interesting though, because he does, I mean, like you just live in this bubble. I mean, like where you're just working all the time, I guess, and like you just don't think of it. So
yeah, the whole audience building process and knowing that you actually have an audience. In fact, what was the moment for you when you discovered that people were actually reading your strip? Was it a moment in the Phoenix where, holy shit, they're actually paying attention to this, or they noticed that I missed a week?
Well, dude, I would get recognized on the street.
No shit.
Yeah, because I mean, I would draw myself in there.
True.
And they were like, I was like riding, like the subway home. And someone like came up to me like before they got off and like, "Oh, are you Karl Stevens?" Like, "Oh, yeah, I love you."
I'm his evil twin. It's okay.
Yeah, it's like
much better twin. It's okay.
And then like someone's like, "Oh, it's like seeing Bart Simpson in person." But I mean, but it was like a big paper, and it was like the Village Voice of Boston. Mm-hmm. So, for you younger listeners, the Village Voice was an alt-weekly.
You see, once upon a time, there were things called alt-weeklies. And now, I have gotten I recognize your voice from the podcast, which is really weird to me that, like, of all things, like, that doesn't make any sense at all. But, yeah.
Wow. Well, that is still something that I'm getting used to.
Yeah.
I'm talking to you right now.
Well, actually, when you mentioned rendering yourself in the strip, especially in the winter, your most recent book, which is over on my nightstand, which is why I'm gesturing in that direction. Mm-hmm. Your wife appears a great deal in it.
Yes.
Any permissions, restrictions, etc., in terms of rendering her in the comic, or is she pretty much resigned to, my husband's a realist cartoonist, this is what I signed up for?
Yeah, I think that. I mean, she does like comments on some stuff, but.
Does she comment more on her visual representation or on the text?
No,
what she says.
It's like how I draw her.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, and I still feel like I haven't gotten her yet.
It's remarkably close. Like the first time I saw her at an event, it was that is exactly who he is drawing in the strip. So
yeah, I mean, I think she's better looking in person.
Yeah,
I mean, it's hard. It's like hard to draw beautiful people, and. I don't know, but I'll get there. Yeah.
Now, your cat, does the cat have any objections to how she's rendered also?
I mean, sometimes. I mean, she'll like turn away,
bat at you while you're drawing. No, you idiot.
I know. Well, that's my whole life now is cats. So
yeah, talk about the new project. You mentioned you have something going with Crown Publishing.
No, it's Chronicle.
Chronicle.
Yeah, it's like Chronicle books. Yeah, well, it's a cat book. I was speaking of the Village Voice. I was doing a weekly strip for them, And, well, that was an interesting story. Actually, Tom Spurgeon. It all comes back to Spurgeon.
Yeah, he's like, the nexus of all realities. He's the Paul
really
Brevet of North America.
Fucking oracle. He's the Oracle of Columbus. And, yeah, like he emailed, this is back in 2016, he emailed me if I'd be interested in pitching something to The Voice, because he was in charge of finding cartoonists. I was like, yes. And but like he also mentioned, and they're paying you $1,000 a week.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, that's
suppose.
Yeah, that's pretty good money. So so I I just reached out to the editor, and it was Andrew Horton at the time, and we like arranged to meet. And, like I pitched him some ideas, and it was like similar to what I was doing at the Phoenix. Just like slice of life stuff, just people living in Brooklyn. No, actually, like that was the idea that like they wanted. I just told them older stuff. So like I sat down with like the meeting with him and like the editor. They were like, I mean, it was that like funny like old man moment. Yeah. I mean, like Andrew is very nice to me, and I forget the other guy's name, but there were like two guys, maybe I'm not sure how old Andrew is, but it's like middle-aged guys, but they were like, so there's this thing going on in Brooklyn, like all these, like, this scene, this is 2016, by the way. There's this scene, maybe you could do something that's sort of like that, maybe the, like, Heart of Juliet Jones, sort of like Stan Drake, but it's like, this like romance kind of thing. And I was like, okay. So,
once
I'll see what I can do. By the way, do you know I live in Boston? But not that that matters. But, so like I, just pitched something that I thought they would be into. And I mean, I definitely had that like sinking feeling like, okay, this might be like a lot more work or like painful than like I was hoping for like the $1,000, because I just trying to have to do something that's like sort of forced, and,
the
like,
vision of somebody else.
Yeah, the vision, like, and I was like older, and like I was in my late 30s at that point, so it's like, like what the hell do I know about, what these kids are doing? Like I'd stopped drinking too. So like I wasn't even like going to shows, or it was just me and Alex, like, watching Jeopardy every night. So anyway, so I drew up some samples, and then they were like, these, they were kind of on the fence. And then, but then Andrew was like, give us something that like women would like, he actually said that, like we like want something that like women could relate to. And I was like, okay, I mean, I didn't know that my work didn't appeal to women.
Go figure.
Go figure. So, I asked the woman in my life, what do women like? And Alex said that they like cats, like try drawing cats. So it's like, okay. So I just started working on the penny strips, and I got really into it. And the reason is that I can use all my like dumb, like dark thoughts and just project it onto the cat.
Yeah.
And it works.
And that gave you a good run as long as The Voice was doing cartoons at that point?
Yeah, exactly. So, if I get cat book rich, like B. Clibon. Is it Clibon?
I never know. Like, and I interviewed his ex-wife, M.K. Brown.
Fuck, I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, no, I was at a trade show in San Francisco.
I didn't know they were married. How did I not know that?
Okay, you didn't know that one. Yeah, no, that was his first wife.
But also, I didn't know you meant M.K. Brown.
Yeah, trust me, that was one of my great. Like, I will go anywhere to sit down with somebody for a conversation.
Yeah.
It was great because actually that San Francisco trip, I pitched Klaus, Richard Sala, and M.K. Brown. And on the hierarchy of reclusive cartoonists, you would think M.K. Brown would have been number one, but she was the only one to say yes. The other two had reasons that they were avoiding human contact. But yeah, I had a rented car, just went all the way out to her place. We sat down, had a nice afternoon talking. But yeah, they were a couple. She was his first wife. And I think there was a story of how basically when they were coming up, they lived and made art in 12-hour shifts.
Wow.
Like one had a night job, the other had a day job. So it was basically just like tag team. One would come in and start making art, and the other one would be, in bed asleep.
Wow.
But yeah, they were both making their thing. So Clibon, I have no idea how it's done, but
Clibon. Wow, that's a crazy relationship. I could not do that, man. Yeah. Like Alex and I have such.
I really wonder about two artist households, and you don't have that. Alex is in the.
Yeah, I couldn't. I mean, I've dated artists in the past, and I mean, it's just strange. I mean, like, it sounds awful, but it's just it's almost like your competition. It's
Oh yeah,
just like,
no,
like right next to you. You know,
the two gag panel family. I wonder about like. Are you deliberately unfunny around each other just because you don't want the other one stealing, an idea that you might be gestating? And
I would do that all the time.
Yeah, I'm not going to say anything funny around you. I'm going to be the most boring guy in the world.
Yeah, so. I mean, that would lead to the breakup for sure. I mean, I'm a thief.
But you're hoping to get a Clyben Rich from
absolutely.
from
I mean,
Cat Books?
if it's going to happen, it's going to be the Cat Book.
Yeah.
I know. I mean, I have high hopes, but I mean, I probably shouldn't, but I mean, like it is like a lot of fun to write and draw too. I mean, just the like pleasure of like drawing Penny's fur is great. I mean, it's very complicated. I mean, she's like a tortie, so it's all these like patches of like black, and but it's I'm spending a lot of time on it, but just it's just fun. Like I'm really having a blast. It's a tight deadline. I have to do 80 more pages by October 1st to hit it, which is 5 months from now.
Yeah, have you ever had that sort of deadline? I know you've had the weekly deadline for things in the past. Have you ever had a larger well, you had with the Botticelli thing, of course, but
yeah. Well, I did have this one book that I'm not going to go into too much that
involved that sort of
it was really it was really tight. It was this book for Candlewood Press, and it was really grueling. But it was a job. I mean, I was doing it for like another writer. Yeah. And I think that's why it wasn't as fun, because I kept getting ideas for it that I wanted to take it in like a different direction, but it was very, very strict. I had to just follow the script. So.
And in this case, the
it's just me.
Constraints of it help just in terms of
for the cats.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they've been great. I mean, they've been very hands off. Yeah. I mean, I didn't. So far. I mean, I haven't. The other shoe hasn't dropped yet, so I think they've liked everything I've done. So
yeah, and then you send in the pages, and they'll say, "We're thinking something more cartoony."
Have you looked at Garfield? Yeah. I'm tempted to look at old Garfields. I've been deliberately not looking at any cat stuff, but I sort of am developing like an affinity for that.
You parodied them in the old Phoenix strips.
I did, yeah. So. Well, I mean, that was early too. I mean, like all those comics. I mean, like that. I mean, okay, Todd McFarlane was one thing, but like of course, like the real introduction to comics was newspapers. You know, so like just reading Calvin and Hobbes when it was coming out back then, and The Far Side and Peanuts. For better or for worse, like I really loved that comic strip, and I saw Lynn Johnston at CXC last year.
Oh yeah,
and it was like I was like 10 years old again.
Yeah, do you have freak out moments with artists you idolize?
Oh yeah, I'm like terrible. Around people like that.
Oh, I did mention the anxiety factor earlier, but
yeah. Let's see like Peter Bagg. I mean, I've met him like a handful of times, and I always feel like a fanboy, like douchebag around him. I mean, I'm sure it's all internal, and I don't know who else. Like Eddie Campbell at TCAF last year. I mean, I felt like a complete fool, because like he's someone that I've always like idolized. I mean, I must have read Graffiti Kitchen like 100 times. I mean, if I could do something like Graffiti Kitchen, I could die happy.
Yeah, I once made the inopportune comment that Tundra Comics, basically we got Graffiti Kitchen and 2 or 3 other things, and one of the cartoonists who was not listed among those 2 or 3 other things listened to that episode and was so angry at me for not citing his book along with it. It was a conversation with Dave McKean, so I cited Cages and Graffiti Kitchen and a couple other things, and he was just irate. This other guy, my book should have been, this guy's an asshole. I'm like, well, yes, I'm an asshole, but it's not about the quality of your book, trust me. But,
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, like we need like someone to win Powerball and to start a company.
Well, that was
just hand out basically like grant money.
It was a Comics Journal interview with Eastman.
Oh, I read that.
Yeah, it was incredible. And there were so many. It's funny though. In my day-to-day life, before I started the trade association, back when I was running a magazine about this weird part of the pharmaceutical industry, there were so many elements of Tundra that you could actually write into like other companies' business world, right down to when they sold and Kitchen Sink even though a kitchen sink was tiny compared to Tundra, nonetheless was the acquirer of this.
Yeah.
The same thing happened with Shearing Plow and Merck. Merck was much bigger. Merck bought Shearing Plow, but they had to structure it legally so that Shearing Plow bought Merck because they didn't want to lose control of certain drugs. It had a contract thing.
Sure.
I was like, wow, remarkably, this is just like Tundra. Again, items in my life keep reflecting back on this weird early 90s comics thing. But yeah, there are all sorts of oddball aspects of that.
Speaking of that scene, that was very formative too, because growing up in the rural, central Massachusetts, I was very close to Northampton.
Yeah.
So once, I got a license, my friends and I would make the pilgrimage to the Words and Pictures Museum, when it was there. And that was that really cemented everything about, wanting to be a cartoonist, just seeing Jack Kirby originals or, Bernie Wrightson, Frankenstein pages, Sienkiewicz. I mean, he had this
imagine Wrightson would have been huge for where you went.
Yeah. I mean, I can still picture it, it's like Frankenstein on the table.
That
one
lab.
and in the lab with all the beakers and everything and but I remember there's the spot of whiteout that was right in the center that caked on, and just seeing that and thinking, oh, okay, Wrightson's human.
Did you get that when did you get that, it takes work and drafts and corrections and things were you ever stymied by the I'm not perfect immediately?
Oh,
and okay, you got it from the outset that you needed to work at things.
Yeah, totally. And actually, going back to Sim too, I mean, because he would write those essays about around that time, in the 90s, about the nuts and bolts of the craft of it,
process,
the process stuff. So it just made it seem like it was okay to make mistakes. And I mean, just that was just something that I was always told, don't worry about being the best, just
as long as the mistake isn't writing an essay about how the female gender is absolutely
yeah, I mean that really is. I think that's one of the great tragics of the great tragedies of comics is Dave's brain. Yeah, it's that because he is so smart. I mean, or was, or I don't know. I mean, he just I mean, I don't know him, but I mean, it's just horrible that that happened, because he was such an innovator and just this incredible, cartoonist, and did a lot for the aesthetics of the medium, and for creators' rights and all that. Yeah. I mean, he was this very positive figure, but then it just went dark, and it just really it just upsets me,
Yeah, I get occasionally when I ask people who I should interview, they say, you should get Dave Sim. I'm like, I know you think that's a good idea, but I have a feeling
he won't talk to you.
Yeah, it'd be 3 minutes and you have to leave now. And
he won't talk to you. I mean, actually, I did work with Dave a little bit, actually.
Yeah.
That's the story. Well, so I sent him, it goes back to Tom Spurgeon. So the Oracle wrote this thing on the Comics Reporter saying that, you should write something to your heroes.
Send a letter to your artistic heroes.
And I occasionally look at parts of Cerebus, for inspiration to steal things.
Oh, visually, it's still astonishing to look at those, both his work and Gerhard's.
Yeah, I mean, it's just what he's done with panel layouts and just I get a kick out of it. So I was like, okay, fuck it. Dave Sim, I know he's a pariah. No one likes him, but, I have a soft spot. Just for that, I am a proud feminist. I will say it.
But his work, though, I'm with you. It's cool to still appreciate what he did visually and the sort of comics that he made, even if the ideological thing is abhorrent to you.
Exactly. So, so I wrote him a letter, and I sent him some books. Hey, Dave, I've loved your work, here's what I've done. And so in 2 weeks, his assistant, because Dave doesn't use the internet, I guess.
He has a fax machine.
Yeah. So Dave faxed me. We're down to the Kinkos. And so, he's like, Dave really loved your books and he wants to talk to you about helping him with this project. So, would you be interested? So it's like, yeah, why not? Let's see what he wants. So, he wants to call you. So, I gave the phone number, and Dave Sim calls me a couple days later. And unfortunately, okay, so I stopped drinking, but I supplemented with smoking weed.
Yeah.
Occasionally.
You have to offset somehow.
Yeah. So that was one of those nights where I was smoking. Like I just smoked with Alex, and Dave Sim called me. It was like at 9:00 at night, so I was completely high, and talking to Dave Sim, and really freaked out. And that was like one of those moments too, because I was suddenly 15 again.
Yeah,
and I was talking
you're
to him.
a fanboy, and
but he was being really nice and just saying, like I've been working on this project, and like I kind of knew about it, but like I'd stopped reading it. The like death of Alex Raymond. Yeah, and so he's like, I think you'd be perfect for it. Like I can't work on it anymore. Like I'd hurt my hand. Would you be interested in like helping me to finish parts of it? Or actually, like there were these bridge sections that he wanted that were between the chapters that he wanted me to do. So I was like, sure. He's like, I'll pay you $300 a page. I'll make it worth it for you. And so I was like, okay, yeah, let's give it a shot. So I did some sample pages, and then he like had me like overnight them to FedEx. I was like, are you sure?
Yeah.
Like, that's almost as much.
It's going to offset the $300 a page, but yeah.
So it was this funny, this like old school way of communicating, like sending him the originals because he wanted to see the originals. So I sent them back to him, and then he wrote me this like 5-page critique of the sample page, like what was wrong with it. And so I just ghosted him. I still feel bad about it, but I just sort of like just backed off.
Yeah.
And because I just saw myself as working on this for the next 10 years, just being Dave Sim's like assistant.
Not getting any.
It's like I'm kind of like I'm like coming out of this weird drunken like haze of the past 10 years, and like I'm really starting to get very focused on my work, and I don't want to have this period be Dave Sim's assistant. And I mean, but he's like so self-aware of like how he's viewed, I think, because like the whole time, like that brief period, he was like, are you sure you want to be associated with me?
Have your name attached to
mine. Yeah. And I was like, I don't care, but I mean, maybe I do a little bit. but I mean, and he was like, well, like what else did he say? Oh, but he was also very like, maybe I shouldn't say it. I mean, like, he was like very nice about saying, just like say hello to Alex for me, like make sure you say
solicitous, but
and just like very
while she's draining the energy from your life. Well, I felt bad because I picked up the Puma Blues big compilation.
I used to know Steve Murphy actually.
Yeah. Oh yeah, another Northampton guy.
Yeah, like he had actually my first comics ever published. Yeah. Where he like had this magazine in Northampton. And he like ran them. So he was the editor, and for the life of me, I can't fucking remember what it was called. I think it was. I'm like, do you remember what it was called?
No, I didn't know he had his own book.
Yeah,
or his own magazine.
It was something like The Valley or something. But like he was the editor there, and like I'd met him at some con because like I would go to cons and sell my mini comics, like a lot. And like there was one at the Hotel Northampton, and like he was there, and like we were talking. He's like, "Hey, you want to do some comics?" So, but anyways,
but yeah,
he's the Puma Blues writer.
But they did I think Dover did a full. They completed the Puma Blues finally. He and Mike Zilli, and it's got an introduction from Sim that starts out fine and then degenerates into the sunken planet theory that basically a feminine planet smashed into Earth and is basically just this whole cosmology thing. I'm like. Yeah. Oh, you're batshit crazy. I forgot. Okay, that's still gonna infiltrate everything you write. So,
was Dave the first one ever to be canceled?
Yeah, I never even got deplatformed. He deplatformed himself. He finished 300 issues and then came back with that absolutely bizarre.
Yeah, I mean, like, did you read it back when you were back then?
I started just around that time. I started with the 150s to 160s. I started getting the phone books and the biweekly reprints they were doing, and then right around the 180s, he had his anti-feminist screed that was pretty nuts. I hung on for another year. Then right before 200, I'm like, what the hell am I reading this for? He doesn't know what he's doing, or at least what he's doing might be perfectly fine in his head. But as a comic, this is a completely, unreadable experience for me. Yeah. I ended up getting the later phone books and reading the last 100. And Gary Groth threatened to have me write like an appreciation or at least a critique of Cerebus after 300 finished. I'm like, no, I'm not going to take you up on that one, Gary. That's
Really?
perfectly fine. Yeah.
Well, like my friend Tim, like Tim Kreider. Do you know Tim?
Yeah, we met once at at SPX a bunch of years ago.
Oh,
yeah.
You should talk to him. Like he'd be a great interview. But he's he like wrote a critique of Cerebus for the journal.
Yeah, I think that was
really interesting.
Yeah, I'm much happier someone else did it than me.
yeah. We like talk about Sim a lot. We get together. Well, not a lot, but
a topic of conversation.
A topic of conversation.
But last thing, I guess, just because you have to get down to TCAF. Can you talk about the change of life? You turned 40 last year. Yeah. You've quit booze a bunch of years before that, vegan, running, etc. Was there a sense of either time running out or I really need to get serious about what I'm doing that sort of led to those decisions? And then how did 40 hit you?
Yeah, it was like all the above. I mean, just like having to get serious. Well, it was really meeting Alex. I mean, there is the like lowest point was probably like around 2011, 2012. I was in this bad relationship. I was living in Brooklyn and,
That's bad enough. Yeah.
It was great. I mean, I love living in Brooklyn and, like my relationship was terrible, but, I liked her friends and it was fun to like, it was fun to hang out, but, I was broke and I was like sort of living this like fantasy world. Like I wasn't working. I was just like trying to live off like freelance stuff. And, there's like a tension, but I was also just really diving to the bottom of the bottle. And, but I like met Alex at this party in Boston and we just did like the long distance thing. And, I just, I eventually moved back. I'm like leaving a lot out, but, and then, we were just together for a year and it started like with the exercise, like she started getting me to exercise and then, that led to just quitting booze. Well, there was this moment with her, like I embarrassed her friends.
You mentioned it in the winter. There's a couple of panels in your most recent book.
It was a real lame, like in one of her bougie friends, like at this party and there was no art on the walls, and like they were like these, they like had money and like, I mean, that's like my biggest like pet peeve. It's just like people who have the means that like just don't have art or like something. I mean, like a print, just like, like blank walls and just like gets to me. So I was like ranting about that, like after like 10 whiskeys, to like the mother of like Alex's friend. And it got back to her and she was just offended. And, like Alex was really upset and I'd never seen her that way before. And I was like, all right, I need to like get my shit together. And, like, I'm not going to lose Alex, like, over this, So I just quit. But then, like, that just became this thing. So then, like, we started, like, our friends got into TM and they were, like, trying to get us to do it. So we started doing transcendental meditation. And that also helped, like, the focus, too. Yeah, but then, like, but that was always there, just, like, nagging me that, like, I like, need to, like, just stop fucking around and, like, just start, working a lot harder and, like, focusing. And I really just needed that, like, structure, it's just that, like, structure of these things to, help me do what I gotta do. But, I mean, now it's just, I've like made more money this year than I've ever made on comics, like with the advance and the like New Yorker stuff, that it's, I'm like sort of at that point where I could quit my day job, but I'm like so afraid to.
Yeah. There's still that temptation of, I could do this, but I'm tempting fate. But
like, I know like it would just bring it to like, if like I just didn't have that, but it's also becoming, cause it's like, I'm like working like at the day job, which means that I'm working in like 30-second spurts because like I'm getting interrupted all the time. But like I've like developed a way to like do that, and I like wonder if I'm gonna have to like recreate that at home.
Yeah, if you could actually have 6 hours uninterrupted during the workday.
But I like had that in the past, but like it was when I was single and like I would work like 16-hour stretches and like those would be like my happiest days. But I mean it's I guess I'm searching like for that that balance, you know, because also back then I would do that, but then like I would go on like a 2-day drunk, you know, so I mean, like, could I really be like monastic and like, you know, just have, you know, just work like 12-hour days every day, and
while still not jeopardizing your marriage,
yeah, exactly,
relationship to the cat, which is also important.
Yeah, so. and that too, you know, so I don't know, but I mean, like, you know, Alex is like good for that because like she, you know, gets me to, you know, pretend that I'm normal a little bit more. So I think that's important. Because, I mean, I don't want to be like these fucking cartoons.
Bunch of social misfits. I'll let you get back to him. Karl, thanks so much for coming on the show.
All right. Thanks, Gil.
And that was Karl Stevens. You should follow him on Instagram at Karl Stevens Art, which is KarlStevensArt, where you can check out his work, find links to his New Yorker comics, ogle other stuff that he's working on, see some photos of what he looked like when he was a young fanboy. There's plenty there. He also has a Tumblr, but doesn't update that too much, so I think the Instagram feed is the best place to get up to date on what Karl's up to. And you should definitely pick up his collection, The Winner, from Retrofit Comics. You can order that online from Retrofit or get it through your favorite comic store. I'll put a link in the show notes to his comics from that Gardner Museum Botticelli exhibition because that work is pretty amazing to look at too. Now, after we wrapped, I asked Karl, so, who you been reading? And if you want to hear his answer to that, and get some extra conversation, you'll need to become a supporter of the Virtual Memories Show so you can get access to our quarterly bonus podcast, Fear of a Square Planet. I'll get started on this quarter's episode next week, but the first quarter 2019 episode features book recommendations and extra conversation with Jerome Charan, Peter Cooper, Edmund White, Eva Hagberg, Mort Gerberg, James Osland, Joe Chardello, James Sturm, Martin Hageland, Bram Presser, and Nathan Englander. You can support the Virtual Memories Show via patreon.com/VMSpod or paypal.me/VMSpod. I've got all sorts of goals and goodies in place for patrons, including that podcast, a patron-only blog, handwritten show notes for every episode, my secret project, which is maybe part of the crisis of faith I had at the beginning of this episode, and more. So go to patreon.com/VMSpod and support the art of fine conversation. Now, I recorded this one during TCAF weekend in May, which was a pretty expensive trip with flights, hotels, parking, dog sitting, etc. I did have a good business meeting during that trip, so I'll expense a little bit of the travel to my work, but otherwise, this was all me. I also got 3 other podcasts out of it, so that spreads out some of the cost, but still, if you want to help defray some of the costs of the Virtual Memories Show, like web hosting, travel, equipment, and coffee, or just toss me some money because you think the show is worth it, then visit patreon.com/VMSpod or paypal.me/VMSpod and make a one-time or recurring donation. Now, special thanks go out to Nick Bartosik, Michael Hacker, Michael Janizik, Fred Kish, Jonathan Kranz, Kevin Katila, Jack Lescamella, Teresa Lewis, Stephen Nadler, Jim Ottaviani, Payne Prophet, Dmitry Samarov, Buzz Carter, Stephen Solomon, Greg Tanner, Ford Thomas, and Garrett Zecker for going over and above in their support of the Virtual Memories Show. We have the full list of show supporters at chimeraobscura.com/VM. Our music for this episode is Fella by Hal Mayforth, used with permission from the artist. You should check out my episode with Hal from the summer of 2018 so you can find out more about his art and his music, and listen to his music at soundcloud.com/Mayforth, and that's MAY4TH. And that's it for this week's episode of the Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. I am taking next week off, as I said, but I should be back on July 16th or so with a conversation with TV critic Emily Nussbaum, author of the new collection, I Like to Watch. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites. vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube, Spotify, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please tell your pals, talk it up on social media, and go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and maybe a review for us. It all goes to helping us build a bigger audience. You've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth. Keep reading, keep making art, and keep the conversation going.